Thank you, Acting Deputy President. So I'm pleased to report tonight that a gentleman I spoke about last week, Jonathan, who is homeless, living in his car with his son on the beach suburbs of Western Australia. I'd really like to say he's been given housing, but today we were successful in getting Jonathan quite a lot of publicity this morning on National AM radio, talking about his plight and the plight of hundreds of others sleeping rough on those Perth beaches, but around 10,000 that are inadequately housed in Western Australia. Jonathan makes up one of those, and again at lunchtime. So I'm really pleased. But what's really interesting about Jonathan's story going to air today is the ABC took about a week to prepare that report, and guess what? During that whole week, Minister Andrews was unavailable for comment. Now, isn't that extraordinary that from last week, when we first started talking to the ABC about that story, somehow Minister Andrews was so terribly busy that his silence on homelessness continues today by declining to make any comment to ABC radio on Jonathan's story. But tonight I really want to talk about Perth Registry Week. A funny name, a bit difficult to get your tongue around, but it's a campaign and it aims to identify the most vulnerable homeless people in the inner city area of Perth. And those vulnerable people are sleeping rough, or perhaps they're in shelters, but they are people who are in dire need of affordable housing. And what Perth Registry Week does, and it is replicated in a number of inner city suburbs across our country, is it aims to prioritise housing, health and other support services based on the assessed vulnerability of those it surveys. And Perth Registry Week is coordinated by RUA, who also had something to say on the ABC's program today. And what RUA said is they don't need reviews, they need affordable housing. There's an urgent need for the Abbott government to put its hand into its pocket and really look at affordable housing, not another review. But RUA coordinates Perth Registry Week in a very broad partnership. So it works with state government departments, local government, the police, the Salvos, Anglicare, WA, St Bart's, United Care West, Vinnie's, the Noongar Patrol and the Perth Mobile GP, because obviously many of these organisations also provide services to homeless, and the police generally know where the homeless are, so they all combine to do this work over 3 nights. And in early May, just a few weeks ago, Perth Registry Week surveyed those people found living rough in the early hours of the night in the Perth CBD, and they surveyed 168 people agreed to be surveyed. And so what the one of the survey tools does, and there are 2, is it identifies how much at risk those who are homeless are of dying if their situation doesn't change. So they are measuring the vulnerability of those living on the streets, the fact that they will die if they don't get affordable housing. That's what one of the survey tools does. We are conducting that survey in our community, in this rich country. That was the question asked by Perth Registry Week just a few weeks ago when they did the survey. There's also another tool that Perth Registry Week uses, and that looks at the sort of support that individuals need to remain stably housed. And these tools together are evidence-informed, accurate and rigorously tested. We don't need a review by the Abbott government. We urgently need funds for affordable housing. The vulnerability factors are a measure of community failure, that we should use these sorts of measures, one of them which measures whether or not a person will die if they are not housed, are a disgrace, and they say to us as a whole community that we are failing. Many individuals, to be part of this survey, you had to have been homeless for more than 6 months, But what the survey told us was that if you're over 25, you are likely to remain homeless in Western Australia for over 6 years. If you are under 25, you are likely to remain homeless for more than 3 years. But let's look at what this test of whether you'll die or not is about. End-stage renal disease, history of cold weather injuries, liver disease or cirrhosis, HIV/AIDS, over 60 years old, 3 or more emergency rooms or hospitalisation in the past 6 months, and trimorbidity, which is a combination of having mental health issues, abusing substances and medical problems. And another high measure is the fact that you've consumed alcohol every day for the last 30 days or that you're using injectable drugs. Of the vulnerability factors of those people sleeping rough in the Perth CBD, the 168 people that agreed to be surveyed, there was strong evidence that many people living rough on the streets of Perth or in homeless shelters were at risk of dying. Most had been homeless for more than 6 months. Almost half were trimorbidity. Over a third had 3 or more accident and emergency visits or hospitalisations in the prior 6 months. 6 were over the age of 60. Among those over 25, there were people with liver and renal disease. Almost half of the group had consumed alcohol every day for the past 30 days, and around a quarter were injecting drugs. Who are these people? Living in the Perth CBD among the mining wealth, the new flash office towers of mining magnates, the consultancies, the labour hire firms, among the high-end shops of King Street, lived people who were at risk of dying, living a precarious life with a very urgent need to be housed, men and women, young and old. The youngest person surveyed was just 15, too young to vote, too young to drive, too young to enter into binding contracts, and by law required to be at school, yet living on the streets of Perth. The oldest was 77. Imagine the stories that person could tell, but living alone on the streets of Perth, discarded by society. Significant numbers of the 168 were Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people, almost half of the adults, and 30% of those under 25. What a disgrace. This is a high proportion of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, when the 2011 census for Western Australia informs us that Aboriginal people represent 3.1% of the West Australian community. And in terms of income support, among those under 25, there was a higher proportion of begging, and in the over 25 groups, there were higher numbers receiving disability support or unemployment benefits. And of that group, 34 reported they'd had a Centrelink breach in the last 6 months. Of course they've had. It's near impossible to comply if you're living rough and don't have a stable address. Violence is an issue. Most had impact on the justice system. Health and mental health issues were high. There are some good news. Some of those people have got housed. But this truly shocking report should make headlines, and it should be something governments not only report on but take action on. But this week, once again, we have seen absolutely nothing from the Abbott government. Minister Andrews says he wants to conduct a review. These people in Western Australia and right across our country do not need a review. We need money, we need funding for affordable housing, and we need it now. We cannot have people dying on our streets. Thank you, Mr Acting Deputy President.